She was a billionaire CEO with everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. He was a poor mechanic sweeping the tarmac, just trying to make it to the next day. But when her jet broke down and he stepped forward with nothing but kindness and a wrench, neither of them could have predicted what would take off next. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about second chances, about building something that holds when everything else has fallen apart, and about how sometimes the most unexpected hand is the one that pulls us home. If you love heartwarming stories about hope, healing, and the quiet magic of human connection, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Every story on this channel is crafted with care to move you, inspire you, and remind you that kindness still matters. All right, let's begin. The jet, the broom in her hand. The sky stretched wide and silent over the Colorado plains, a pale blue canvas streaked with soft morning gold. The small regional airport, just a single strip of weathered tarmac and two squat hangars, still breathed in sleep, its only movement a gust of wind rustling through the dry grass beyond the fence. Jack Dalton moved with unhurried rhythm, his boots whispering over the asphalt as he swept the tarmac with a worn broom. Each push gathered up dust, stray bits of foil from snack wrappers, a half-smoked cigarette someone had no business lighting near jet fuel. He liked starting the day like this. Quiet, repetitive, simple. There were too few things in the world that didn't argue back. His overalls bore the faint orange tint of hydraulic fluid and the older scars of aviation grease. A ball cap shadowed his face, and the bristles of his broom danced like a quiet metronome, steadying him. Jack didn't need much these days. Just a roof over his head, a good wrench in his hand, and a patch of sky that didn't remind him of what he'd lost. Some people went to war and came back missing limbs. Jack had come home with all 10 fingers and a gaping hole where his wife used to be. Cancer didn't wear medals or wave flags, but it took just the same. He paused, rubbing the back of his neck when the wind changed. He felt it before he heard it, a low, uneasy whine from the horizon. His mechanic's ear caught it instantly. That wasn't a smooth descent. That engine had hiccuped twice. Something wasn't right. A minute later, the jet came into view, cutting across the dawn like a silver bird with a bent wing. It tilted ever so slightly on approach, right engine coughing again, and Jack's gut clenched. No one else was scheduled to land for hours. The sleek aircraft, at least a $30 million Gulfstream, he guessed, touched down harder than it should have. It taxied shakily toward the hangar line before groaning to a stop. The left engine wheezed out and died. He heard the quiet echo. Jack leaned his broom against the terminal wall and began walking. No one else moved. No tower crew, no mechanic team. This was a skeleton crew kind of airport, and today he was the only skeleton on duty. As he neared the plane, the side hatch opened with a mechanical hiss, and the staircase unfolded. He expected the usual entourage, a pilot in Ray-Bans, a harried assistant, some sharp-suited exec tapping at a phone. What he didn't expect was her. She appeared in the doorway like a frame from a movie, tall, poised, yet strangely still. A woman in her mid-30s, maybe younger, dressed in tailored cream slacks and a soft cashmere blazer. Her hair, honey blonde and caught by the wind, swept across her cheekbones. There was something in her eyes, tired, guarded, but curious. Her gaze fell on Jack as if she'd never seen a man hold a broom before. He stopped 10 feet from the stairs and tipped his cap back with one finger. "Morning," he said. She blinked. "You work here?" "I do, though today I guess I'm the whole crew." He nodded toward the plane. "Sounded like your left engine coughed on descent." She exhaled, just a hint, and walked down the stairs. "It did. The pilot says it's a pressure sensor. I don't care what it is. I have to be in Oregon by noon. Can't go anywhere until that bird's checked out." He squinted at the intake. "Might be just a sensor, but sometimes those lies are how you find yourself gliding into a cornfield." The woman's lips twitched. Not a smile. Not yet, but almost. Jack approached the fuselage, slow and respectful. "Permission to get a closer look, ma'am?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Ava." "Ava," he repeated, the name foreign on his tongue. He ran his hand gently along the side of the jet, then crouched to peer beneath the intake. "I'm Jack Dalton. Been fixing engines since the Air Force taught me which end of the screwdriver not to hold." Ava folded her arms. "You do this alone?" On slow days, yeah, which is most days. He looked up at her. Something tells me your life doesn't have slow days. She studied him. Not anymore. For the next 20 minutes, Jack worked in silence. His hands moved with purpose, unfastening a small panel, testing pressure lines, scanning for signs of wear. Ava watched, arms still crossed, one foot tapping softly on the tarmac. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry, and for some reason she found herself wanting to tell him anyway. I'm supposed to give a keynote speech this afternoon, she said at last, but I might cancel. Jack didn't look up. Bad timing or bad crowd? She almost laughed. Bad everything. Well, he tightened a hose fitting and stood. Good news is, it's not the sensor. It's a tiny crack in your regulator valve. She won't blow up in midair, but she'll stall if you push too hard. Can you fix it? I can try. He looked at her for the first time like he really saw her. Not the clothes, not the jet. Depends how much trust you're willing to put in a man with a broom. This time she did smile. The tools in Jack's calloused hands weren't fancy. An old torque wrench, a flashlight with half-faded batteries, and a socket set passed down from a friend who'd long since stopped fixing anything but memories. But somehow they looked more trustworthy than the gleaming titanium panel he was easing open. Ava stood a few feet away, arms still crossed, her phone dangling loosely in one hand like a relic she'd forgotten to let go of. She hadn't answered a single call since they landed. Maybe she didn't want to. Jack worked in silence, the low metal clinks of his tools filling the space between them. The wind picked up, fluttering the hem of her coat and pushing strands of hair across her face. She didn't brush them away. She just watched him, head tilted slightly, as if trying to decide whether she was looking at a man fixing a jet or something else entirely. I don't see many Gulf Streams with solo passengers, Jack finally said, breaking the silence with a voice that carried no judgment, let alone CEOs flying quiet and without an entourage. Ava hesitated, then looked down at her phone, her thumb grazing the dark screen. You know who I am. I don't, Jack said simply, but I'm guessing you're someone who's used to having answers. Today just happened to throw you a question you didn't expect. That made her smile. Barely. It was the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes but softened her jaw. I walked out of a board meeting yesterday, she said at last. 13 people in tailored suits sat around a table deciding how best to spin a headline about my broken engagement. I told them they could spin without me. Jack didn't respond right away. He leaned in to adjust a coolant line, his brow furrowed with quiet attention. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't pretend to have the answers. And Ava found that comforting. Was it messy? He finally asked. The engagement or the exit? Both. She exhaled slowly, like air escaping from a pressurized cabin. Let's just say the man I was supposed to marry preferred the press to the truth, and the board preferred him. Jack nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth he pulled from his back pocket. Truth's not very marketable these days. Ava let out a soft laugh, surprised by how true that sounded. Jack stepped back from the plane and looked at her more closely now. Not the way a man looks at a woman, but the way a mechanic looks at a structure that's carrying more weight than it was built for. You sleep at all last night? About 2 hours, in a hotel lobby. I wasn't exactly in the mood for a penthouse. Jack tilted his head slightly. And yet here you are, chasing a flight path like it's going to solve anything. She didn't snap back. Instead, she looked past him toward the end of the tarmac, where the sky met the curve of the earth and turned into soft gold. I thought getting out of Denver would help, she murmured. A clean break. Just air. Jack nodded. Air's good, but sometimes what you need isn't altitude, it's ground. Ava blinked at him. Are you always this philosophical when you fix jets? Jack smirked. Only before coffee. That made her laugh. Short, but real. The sound surprised both of them. He stood and stretched his back with a quiet grunt. Give me 40 minutes. I'll replace the regulator, check the pressure line, and run a manual systems test. But if you're planning to get back in the air before noon, I'd think twice. Ava raised a brow. You saying it's not safe? I'm saying the plane might be ready, but I'm not sure you are. She froze at that. Not offended, not angry, just still. It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that to her without an agenda. Most people either feared her or envied her. No one dared speak plainly. But this man in oil-streaked overalls, holding a wrench older than her last company acquisition, he saw straight through her veneer, and somehow she didn't want to run from it. I was headed to a leadership summit in Oregon, she said quietly, to give a talk on resilience. Her voice faltered slightly. Funny, right? Jack gave her a long look, then offered a slow nod. Maybe not. You showed up, didn't you? With the engine coughing and your world off kilter. That counts for something. Ava looked down, smiling to herself. That's a very forgiving standard. Only one I've got, Jack said. Life broke me more than once. But if the gears still turn, you don't toss the whole machine. You clean it. You tighten it. You keep going. You know, she stared at him, the breeze now sweeping across her back like a whisper. You don't talk like a man who lives alone. Jack's eyes darkened to shade. I didn't. Not always. There was a pause. She didn't press. He cleared his throat, looked away. Listen, Ava, if you don't mind waiting, there's coffee in the hangar. Strong, hot, and slightly burnt. Just like life. She tilted her head. You offering me coffee? I'm offering you a break. Not the kind that's in headlines. The kind where you sit for 5 minutes and remember what breathing feels like. Ava hesitated, and then surprisingly nodded. All right, she said, pocketing her phone. They walked toward the hangar, an ex-CEO in designer heels and a mechanic with grease under his nails. Two strangers who didn't look like they belonged in the same sentence, let alone the same morning. But for reasons neither of them could explain, it already felt like the beginning of something. The hangar wasn't much, just a big box of corrugated steel that moaned when the wind pressed against it. But inside it was warmer than expected. A row of fluorescent lights hummed above, flickering a little like they were unsure if it was morning yet. Ava walked in behind Jack, her heels tapping lightly on the concrete floor. She looked out of place amid the tool racks and rolling carts, but she didn't seem to care. Jack had cleared a little area off to one side with a battered table and two folding chairs. A chipped coffee pot sat on a hot plate, exhaling steam like a tired locomotive. This, Jack said, pouring two cups, is either the worst coffee you've ever had or the most honest. Ava took the mug he offered and lifted it to her lips. One sip, and she coughed into her hand. Definitely honest, she said hoarsely, wiping her mouth with the back of her wrist. Jack chuckled, setting down his cup. Told you. They sat in companionable quiet, the sound of distant birdsong threading in through a cracked side window. Jack sipped slowly, like he had nowhere else to be. Ava turned the mug in her hands, her fingers lingering on a faded sticker that read, World's Okayest Mechanic. She smirked. You give yourself that title? Earned it, actually. Guy I used to work with gave me that sticker after I rebuilt a carburetor backward. Ava raised an eyebrow. And you kept it? Badge of honor. You don't learn by getting everything right the first time. She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting across the hangar. Rows of tools, oil-stained rags, old photos pinned on a corkboard. In one, Jack stood beside a small propeller plane, his arm around a woman with dark hair and a sunlit smile. The photo was faded, corners curled. That your wife? She asked quietly. Jack followed her gaze. His voice was low when he answered. Yeah, Emily. She passed a while back. I'm sorry, Ava said. The words automatic but her tone sincere. Jack nodded once, looking down into his cup. Me too. Silence filled the space again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was respectful, honest. I lost someone too, Ava said after a moment. Not to death, just someone I thought I knew. Jack didn't pry. He just waited. I built a company, she went on, from a borrowed laptop and a $10,000 grant. I was 25. By the time I was 30, we were on the cover of Forbes. Jack whistled low. Ava smiled faintly. It sounds glamorous until you realize you've built a rocket ship without checking who's flying with you. I let someone into my orbit who made everything shine brighter. For a while, then the shine cracked and it all went hollow. Your fiancé, she nodded. He said all the right things, knew how to stand beside a powerful woman without shrinking, or so I thought. Jack didn't speak. He just listened. Turned out, Ava said, her voice softening, He loved the idea of me, not the reality. When things got messy, press scandals, investors panicking, he distanced himself. And when I told him I wanted to step back, to figure out who I was without the company title, he didn't even argue. He just walked. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loosely. That kind of silence tells you more than any fight ever could. She looked at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Exactly. They sat like that for a while. Two lives with broken chapters, finding in each other a strange sort of reflection. You still own the company? Jack asked after a bit. I'm still the majority shareholder, Ava said. But I resigned as CEO last night. Effective immediately. I haven't told the press yet. Why Oregon? There's a property outside Tillamook, she said. A place I bought years ago with the dream of turning it into a tech training retreat for underprivileged kids. I shelved the idea when the company exploded. And now? Now, she said slowly, I think I want to dust it off. Jack nodded, impressed. That's a good dream. I don't even know if it's salvageable, she said. It's probably overgrown. Needs more help than I can give it. He smiled slightly. You'd be surprised what you can bring back to life if you take your time and care enough to get your hands dirty. Ava looked at him then, really looked. There was something about this man, with his easy strength and steady presence, that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Not admired, not envied, just seen. Jack, can I ask you something? He raised an eyebrow. If you could go anywhere, right now, no strings, no schedule, no expectations, where would you go? He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. Truth? Always. I don't think it's about where I'd go, he said. It's about who I'd go with. That answer hung between them like a feather caught midair, unexpected, delicate, and full of gravity. Ava looked away, swallowing hard. Then she stood slowly, setting the mug down. Well, she said, your regulator's not going to fix itself. Jack grinned. No, ma'am, but it sure helps to start with good company. She gave him a half smile that felt more real than anything she'd worn in a boardroom for years. And as she stepped back into the morning light, Jack watched her go. Not as a CEO, not as a story in a magazine, but as a woman trying to remember who she was before the noise. The regulator clicked into place with a soft snick, followed by the low hum of a functioning hydraulic system. Jack wiped the sweat from his temple with the back of his wrist, crouched beside the Gulfstream's left engine like it was an old friend he'd coaxed back to life. You should be good to go, he called up toward the open cabin door. But I'd keep her below 35,000 feet until you get a full inspection. Ava stood at the top of the stairs, a pair of sunglasses perched in her hand, not yet shielding her eyes. She looked down at him, her silhouette framed by the soft shimmer of the mid-morning sun. Something in her posture had shifted, not the polished control of a CEO, but the stillness of someone on the edge of making a real decision. Jack climbed down from the engine bay and began gathering his tools. He didn't rush, but he didn't linger either. They'd had their coffee, shared a few truths, and now the world would keep turning. She would fly off to Oregon, and he'd return to his broom. Thank you, Ava said, coming down the steps. Jack gave a small nod, not looking up as he secured the last wrench. Just doing my job. No, you weren't. That stopped him. He glanced over his shoulder. You didn't have to fix it yourself. Didn't have to talk to me like I was a person instead of a walking headline. And you sure as hell didn't have to make me laugh this morning. Jack gave a lopsided shrug. Didn't seem right letting you face the sky on your own with something busted under the surface. Ava took a slow breath and looked toward the horizon. The sky was bright now, stretching endless and blue. Her jet stood gleaming beside her, powerful, silent, ready. Everything about her life had always been fast. Fast decisions, fast travel, fast exits. But not this man. Jack Dalton moved like someone who knew the weight of things. The kind of man who didn't confuse silence with weakness or humility with lack. I want to show you something, she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. Show me? My place in Oregon. He laughed softly, assuming she was joking. That'd be a long drive. I wasn't thinking drive, she said, stepping closer. Jack's smile faded, replaced by something cautious. You want me to come with you? Ava nodded once. Yes. He stood still for a moment, the wind tugging gently at the edge of his shirt. This woman, this stranger he'd met less than 4 hours ago, was asking him to step into a different sky. Why? He asked, not unkindly. Because I need to go, she said, voice low and honest. And I don't want to go alone. Jack searched her eyes, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. Not fear, not arrogance, but a quiet kind of hope. Fragile. Brave. I'm not a pilot, he said. I have two of those, she replied, a soft smile on her lips. I need someone who knows how to rebuild things. Someone who sees potential where others see scrap. Jack looked back toward the hangar. Inside was his world. A lonely cot, a cracked coffee pot, a photograph pinned to the wall. A life built on routine and resilience. Safe. Predictable. He'd spent the last 10 years fixing other people's damage. He hadn't expected anyone to invite him to help build something new. You really trust strangers that easily? He asked. No, Ava said. But I trust you. Those four words landed harder than any offer he'd ever received. They weren't transactional. They weren't strategic. They were just true. Jack took a deep breath. He felt the weight of it, what it would mean to say yes, to pack a bag, to let go of the silence he'd wrapped himself in for so long. I'd need to grab a few things, he said, brushing a hand through his hair. Ava's smile widened just slightly. We'll wait. Jack looked up at the sky. It had been years since he'd left this town, years since he'd flown for anything other than necessity. But today the horizon didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a beginning. He nodded once. All right, let's go see what's worth saving. 30 minutes later, Jack returned with a small duffel slung over one shoulder. Ava was already inside the jet, seated near the window, hands folded in her lap. She looked out as he climbed the steps, her expression unreadable. You sure about this? Jack asked, standing just inside the cabin door. No, she said truthfully. But maybe that's the point. He took the seat across from her. The engines fired up with a smooth rumble, the sound rolling through the fuselage like a pulse. The pilot's voice crackled in the intercom. Cleared for takeoff, runway 31. Ava turned to Jack, her gaze softer now. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, he replied. The wheels left the ground a moment later, and for the first time in a long while, both of them stopped looking back. The Gulf Stream sliced through a stretch of pale blue sky, its engines humming low and even like a lullaby written in jet fuel. Outside the windows, the clouds drifted in great cotton swells beneath the fuselage, glowing white against the morning sun. Inside the cabin, there was silence. Not the strained silence of strangers, but something gentler, like the quiet that follows a long conversation or the space between breaths in a song that doesn't need to fill every moment. Jack sat across from Ava, a seatbelt loose around his hips, hands resting on his knees. He wasn't used to traveling like this, on leather seats, sipping still water from glass bottles with names he couldn't pronounce. Yet he didn't fidget or stare wide-eyed like a tourist. He just looked out the window like a man who hadn't seen this view in a long time and had almost forgotten how much he missed it. Ava watched him from across the aisle. There was something steady about the way he sat. Shoulders relaxed, gaze thoughtful, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. In a world where everyone she knew raced to speak, to prove, to sell, Jack was the first person who made silence feel like an invitation. She reached for the folder on the tray beside her, an outline of the Tillamook property, blueprints she'd shelved years ago. The ink was smudged in places, corners bent. She turned the first page, then stopped. Jack's voice broke the quiet. You ever get tired of being first? Ava looked up. First what? First to talk. First to lead. First to fix things. Seems like that's what everyone expects of you. She closed the folder slowly. More than you know. He nodded, turning back toward the clouds. My wife used to be like that. Emily. She ran a community center back in Dallas before we moved out here. Never stopped. Not for birthdays, not for holidays. She carried everyone else's weight like it was her own. Ava's eyes softened. You moved because of her illness? Yeah, Jack said. When she got the diagnosis, we figured fresh air and slow mornings would help. And they did. For a while. Ava didn't ask what happened next. She didn't need to. Some days, Jack continued, I think she would have lived longer if she'd let herself rest more. But she always said, Jack, I wasn't built for watching. He smiled faintly. She had a fire in her. Ava leaned back in her seat. You talk about her like she's still here. She is, Jack said, in the things I fix, in the way I talk to people, in the part of me that didn't turn to stone when she left. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The plane drifted into smoother air, and the clouds outside seemed to part like curtains opening onto a new stage. You remind me of her, Jack added. Ava turned to him surprised. I do. Not in the way you look, but in the way you don't give up on things, even when everyone else has walked away. Ava felt something shift in her chest. An ache, maybe, or something tender finally thawing. I used to think that made me strong, she said. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe it does, Jack replied. Or maybe it just makes you human. She looked down at her hands, then out the window again. The coast was beginning to reveal itself far below, a jagged edge of green and gray meeting the Pacific like a seam sewn into the world. When I bought that land in Oregon, Ava said, I had this idea I could build something lasting, a place where kids who didn't come from privilege could learn about aviation, robotics, systems thinking, all the stuff that changed my life. But the bigger the company got, the more that dream felt like a fantasy. Jack listened quietly, one leg crossed over the other. I shelved it the day we passed $1 billion valuation, she continued. Suddenly, the board didn't want me spending energy on passion projects. They wanted me lean, focused, palatable, and I let them carve me into that version. Jack gave a slow nod. But you remembered the dream. Ava smiled, but there was sadness behind it. It's been sitting in a drawer for 5 years. You ever try to dig up an old version of yourself and realize you don't recognize her anymore? Jack chuckled softly. Only every day. That made her laugh, a warm, real laugh that filled the space between them. You really came with me, she said, as if just now believing it. Jack looked at her, eyes kind and steady. You asked. A beat passed. Then she asked, Aren't you afraid? Of what? Of where this leads. Of what I might not be able to give back. Jack paused, then said, You don't owe me anything, Ava. I didn't say yes because I wanted a return on investment. I said yes because sometimes when someone reaches out a hand, you take it. Not because you know where it leads, but because it's been too long since anyone reached. Ava looked away, blinking quickly. She wasn't someone who cried easily. In business, emotion was often viewed as a liability. But here in this pressurized capsule between altitudes and expectations, Jack's words found her unarmored. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Outside, the coastline grew sharper, the rugged Oregon cliffs now visible in the distance, kissed by mist. Below, the future was waiting in trees and fog and soil, a forgotten blueprint, a long-lost dream, and maybe a second chance. As the plane began its slow descent, Ava placed her palm flat on the folder. She looked at Jack and said softly, I'm not sure what's going to happen next. Jack smiled. That's the best kind of beginning. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, kicking up mist from the rain-slicked runway. Oregon had greeted them with the kind of weather that felt ancient, clouds that hung low like old souls, and a wind that whispered through the evergreens as if telling secrets no one had earned yet. Ava peered through the cabin window as the Gulf Stream rolled to a stop on the small airstrip outside Tillamook. The place looked almost untouched by time. One lone hangar, a rusted windsock, and beyond that, a gravel road vanishing into the trees. Jack stepped off the plane first. The air hit him like memory, earthy, damp, alive. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath, grounding himself in the scent of pine and distant salt from the sea. Ava followed, tugging her coat tighter against the wind. She wore boots now, practical ones, and no makeup. Jack noticed, not because she looked less glamorous, but because she looked more herself. They climbed into a battered Jeep one of Ava's assistants had arranged to have waiting. Jack took the wheel without asking, and Ava didn't object. She gave directions sparsely, like someone navigating the map of a place she once loved but no longer trusted. They drove in silence, passing groves of towering spruce and fir. Moss dripped from branches like threads unraveling from an old sweater. Nature had grown wild here, indifferent to blueprints and deadlines. Finally, Ava pointed to a narrow turnoff. There. The path curved through a canopy of trees, then opened into a clearing where a long, low building stood nestled at the base of a hill. It was made of cedar and glass, or at least it had been. Now the wood was grayed and weather-streaked, the windows coated in grime. The wide porch had a corner, sagging where a support beam had given way. Weeds curled up through the slats. Jack pulled the Jeep to a stop. Ava sat quietly for a moment, staring at the building. "I thought it would feel smaller," she said softly. Jack followed her gaze. "Dreams usually do once you get closer." They got out. The gravel crunched beneath their boots. Ava walked ahead, brushing her fingers along the railing of the porch. A single door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind like it, too, had been waiting. Inside, dust reigned. The open concept interior, once meant to be a workshop and classroom space, was cluttered with old furniture covered in tarps. A few exposed wires hung like vines from the ceiling. In one corner, a pile of unused equipment boxes sat unopened, their labels faded from years of neglect. Ava walked through the room like a ghost returning to the body she had once lived in. "I bought this place 6 years ago," she said, more to herself than to Jack. "Had architects draw up plans. Contractors lined up. Then the company exploded. I kept telling myself I'd come back. Just not yet. Not until I had time." Jack knelt and pulled back a tarp from a workbench. Beneath it was a half-assembled drone model, untouched since the day it was laid down. The soldering iron beside it still had a coil of melted resin frozen mid-drip. He stood and looked at her. "Well, you've got time now." Ava laughed, dry, bitter. "Yeah, but I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Jack stepped toward her, calm and steady. "That's the best place to start." She met his eyes, something vulnerable flashing across her features. "What if I've changed too much to make this work?" "Then you build it new," he said. "Not from who you were, from who you are now." Outside, the wind howled once, then faded. Ava looked around the space. The dust, the neglect, the promise buried beneath it all, and something clicked into place. Not certainty, not even clarity, just a willingness to try. "You said you know how to fix broken things," she said. Jack smiled. "I also know how to sweep floors and seal roofs." She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small ring of keys. "Then welcome to the crew." He took them with a small nod, tucking them into his jacket like they were made of gold. That evening, they stood on the porch watching the fog roll in from the sea. Jack had cleared debris from the steps while Ava walked the perimeter, taking inventory of what had survived time's slow erosion. They didn't talk much. There was too much to feel and not enough language for any of it. At some point, Ava turned to him and asked, "What made you say yes back at the airport?" Jack didn't answer right away. He studied the fog, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. "Emily used to say the world only moves forward when good people say yes to strange invitations." Ava smiled faintly. "Sounds like a woman worth listening to." She was. They watched the trees sway, branches reaching like arms in slow motion. "I don't know if this place can be what it was supposed to be," Ava said, "but I want to find out." Jack looked at her, and for the first time since they met, there was a quiet light in his eyes. "Then we start tomorrow." The next morning, the sky broke open in streaks of pale gold and soft gray. Sunlight poured through the mist like it had been waiting for permission. Jack was up before it arrived. He moved across the property with quiet purpose, stacking broken boards, pulling weeds from the foundation line, testing the porch's stability. There was no one around to see him work, but he acted like there was an audience of one. The man he used to be, the man he was becoming again. By the time Ava stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand and sleep still tugging at the corners of her eyes, Jack had already cleared half the main entryway. She paused, watching him from the steps. No music, no fanfare, just a man doing honest work with a kind of reverence she hadn't seen in years. "You've been up a while," she said, voice still raspy. "Old habit," Jack replied, straightening with a wince and brushing dirt from his jeans. "The world's quieter before it remembers to be noisy." Ava smiled into her cup. "That sounds like a line from a poem. More like something I mutter when my back reminds me I'm not 25. They worked side by side for hours. Ava swapped her blazer for a flannel shirt and gloves, and together they unearthed what was salvageable. Beams still solid beneath the rot, wiring that only needed rerouting, a classroom layout that, despite the dust and time, still whispered hope. By mid-afternoon, a battered pickup truck rumbled into the clearing. Jack looked up as it came to a stop. A tall man in his 60s climbed out, gray beard, trucker cap, one leg stiff from an old injury. He wore a tool belt and a look that said he didn't waste time. "Didn't think I'd ever see someone up here again," the man said, stepping onto the gravel. "Frank," Jack said, smiling, "heard you still had the best hands in Tillamook." "Still got 'em," Frank replied, extending a hand. "You're lucky I was bored." Jack introduced Ava, who shook Frank's hand with both warmth and a quiet humility. She didn't need to impress anyone here, and that, more than any title, impressed Frank. They got to work that afternoon, pulling old nails, mapping out repairs, and laughing in the kind of short, tired bursts that come from real labor. Two of Frank's grandsons showed up the next day, high schoolers who'd been suspended for fighting, bored stiff on probation, and told by their grandfather that they could either spend their week helping Jack or learn the difference between drywall and hard time. Their names were Manny and Cole, and they were exactly the kind of kids Ava had built this place for. They didn't say much at first, kept their hoods up and their music loud, but when Jack handed them a set of blueprints and said, "We're rebuilding this wing, and I want you two to lead the frame mapping," they looked at him like he was either crazy or the first adult to take them seriously. They chose the latter, and by the third day, the boys were showing up early, tools in hand, with questions scribbled in the margins of printouts Jack had left them the night before. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting long amber shadows across the porch, Ava sat with Jack on the edge of the steps, sipping lemonade out of mason jars Frank had dug up from somewhere in his truck. They were tired in the best way, sunburned, sore, and coated in sawdust. Ava stretched her legs, groaning. "I forgot how good this kind of tired feels." Jack smiled, nodding toward the workshop. "You see Manny today?" He was explaining the purpose of structural bracing to Cole using Legos. 3 days ago, that kid wouldn't make eye contact. "They're learning because you believed they could." Jack shook his head. "They're learning because someone gave them a place to stand." Ava looked at him, then turned to gaze at the structure rising behind them. The skeleton of a new wing stood half-framed, sunlight slipping through it like stained glass. "This place is already becoming what I dreamed," she said. Jack didn't respond immediately. He just watched her, a kind of quiet awe behind his steady eyes. "You're not doing this for credit, are you?" he asked softly. Ava shook her head. "I don't need my name on the front door. I just want to build something that gives more than it takes." Jack leaned back on his palms, looking up at the sky. "That's the kind of legacy that lasts." She looked over at him, suddenly aware of how close they were. The silence between them felt different now. Not empty, but charged, like something was about to take shape if neither of them blinked too quickly. "I'm glad you're here, Jack," she said. He met her gaze. "So am I." The moment stretched, gentle, unspoken, but undeniable. Then, as if the wind itself knew they needed a soft landing, the branches above them rustled and shifted, scattering dappled light across their boots. That night, just before turning in, Jack pinned something to the old corkboard inside the workshop. A photo he took with his phone. A candid shot of Manny explaining something to Cole, both of them grinning, covered in sawdust. Beneath it, Jack scribbled a single sentence on a piece of tape and stuck it below the photo. "The first stone matters." It started with a drone. Jack spotted it first, a low hum circling above the worksite as he helped Cole hang insulation along the east wall. It dipped in and out of view, its camera lens blinking like a watchful eye. He lowered his tool belt and shielded his eyes against the sun. "That yours?" he asked Cole. The teenager snorted. "Man, I wish. That thing cost more than my car." By the time the drone disappeared behind the trees, Jack already had a sinking feeling. He'd seen this dance before. Quiet places didn't stay quiet forever, especially not when billionaires were involved. The article dropped the next morning. It hit Ava's inbox just as she was reviewing updated renderings for the multipurpose classroom. The subject line was clickbait gold. "From boardroom to barnwood, billionaire CEO Ava Kingsley spotted building hippie retreat in Oregon woods." She opened it, read every word. There were aerial photos of the workshop, a grainy, zoomed-in image of her and Jack standing on the porch laughing. Quotes from anonymous investors speculating about her mental state, thinly veiled concern over unconventional behavior, and a few snide remarks from former board members who were now deeply disappointed. Ava didn't flinch, but the weight settled in her chest like wet stone. Jack found her an hour later, sitting alone on a sawhorse in the half-frame common room, the article open on her phone. He didn't ask. He just sat down beside her and waited. "They think I've lost my mind," she said flatly. "Do you think you have?" She turned to him, her smile small and humorless. "I stepped down from a billion-dollar company, disappeared without a press release, and started hanging drywall with ex-cons and teenage delinquents. That's not exactly how Forbes defines visionary leadership." Jack leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Maybe it's time we stop letting Forbes define anything." Ava let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I knew they'd come looking eventually. I just thought, I hoped it would take longer." "The truth doesn't care how fast the noise shows up," Jack said. "But noise doesn't build anything. You do." She looked down at her boots, the edges still caked with Oregon mud. "They're saying I've gone rogue, that I'm unstable, that I'm running from something." Jack's voice was quiet but certain. "Are you?" "No," she said. "I'm running towards something. I just don't know what yet." He reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. "Then maybe it's time to tell them that." Ava blinked. "You want me to talk to the press?" "I want you to talk to people, whoever they are, not with spin, with truth." She stared at him, remembering the old Ava, sharp-tongued, perfectly tailored, practiced in the art of saying everything without revealing anything. And then she looked at the woman she'd become, the one with calloused hands, no makeup, and the beginnings of purpose tugging at her heart again. "I don't even know how to be that person anymore," she whispered. "Then don't be her," Jack said. "Be you. That's the only one worth listening to." 2 days later, Ava stood in front of a small crowd on the retreat's porch. They weren't investors or media moguls, just neighbors, curious locals, and a few folks who'd seen the article and driven in from nearby towns. A young mother with her daughter, a high school counselor from Portland, a man who used to teach shop class and still believed in kids who struggled to sit still in math. She held no notes. No PR team hovered in the wings. She wore jeans and a dark green jacket and tucked her hands in the pockets because they wouldn't stop trembling. "I know some of you read what's out there," Ava began, "and I won't deny it. I left my company without warning. I walked away from meetings, from money, from the noise." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "I did it because I couldn't hear myself anymore. I did it because somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the person who used to dream about this place. And because sometimes you have to leave the room to remember why you ever entered it in the first place." A few heads nodded. "This retreat isn't a vanity project. It's not a PR stunt or a breakdown in disguise. It's a beginning. For me. For the young people who will come here. For anyone who's ever felt like they had to choose between success and soul." Someone in the back clapped. Then another. And then the porch filled with quiet, genuine applause. Not the polite kind Ava had known in boardrooms, but the kind that meant we hear you. She stepped down from the porch and walked back toward the workshop, where Jack was leaning against the doorframe, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Well?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You planning on running for office?" Ava smirked. "Don't push it." Cyrus sighed. They stood side by side, watching the visitors mingle, ask questions, walk through the structure that was slowly becoming something more than wood and wires. "You think this will shut them up?" she asked quietly. "No," Jack said, "but I think it reminded them you're not hiding." She nodded. "Feels good." Truth usually does, like standing in the wind without flinching. That evening, long after the visitors had gone and the sun had dropped below the tree line, Ava returned to the old corkboard in the corner of the workshop. She pinned a new photo beside Jack's snapshot of the boys, a shot taken that morning, her on the porch, mid-sentence, hands slightly raised, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. Underneath it, she wrote just 2 words, "Still standing." The wind rolled in from the Pacific late that night, pushing through the trees like it had unfinished business. Jack stood at the edge of the porch, his eyes on the dark line of clouds gathering above the treetops. The air had that electric weight to it, thick with pine and warning. He knew weather like this, not from a forecast, but in his bones. Inside the retreat's unfinished main hall, Ava was crouched over a stack of supply receipts, reviewing lumber orders by flashlight. She looked up as Jack stepped through the doorway, shaking rain from his jacket. "We've got maybe an hour," he said, voice steady. Ava frowned. "That bad? Wind's going to tear through like it's looking for something. We need to brace the new framing and pull the tarps over the open windows." She rose without hesitation. There were no protests, no questions about comfort, just motion. That was Ava now. Less boardroom, more boots on ground. Together they moved fast, securing loose boards, covering exposed insulation, tying down stacks of drywall. Frank had gone home hours earlier, and the boys were staying with their grandmother for the weekend. It was just the two of them now, racing a storm. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the structure like a ghostly cathedral. Thunder followed, a low growl that vibrated in the soles of their boots. By the time the rain hit, it came sideways. They ducked back into the workshop as the downpour began hammering the roof, drowning out even their breath. Jack set down a rope coil and wiped his forehead with a grimy sleeve. His hair was soaked. So was Ava's. Water dripped from the ends of her sleeves, but she didn't seem to notice. She was laughing. Not a full laugh, more like a breath that had nowhere else to go, so it came out with joy, disbelief, and adrenaline all tangled together. Jack grinned. "You okay?" She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I haven't worked like that since college. My whole body's going to file a complaint tomorrow." He chuckled, pulling a stool over and handing her a dryish towel from the back room. "Stormproofing isn't glamorous, but it's honest." Ava sat, toweling her hair. "It feels real. That's what matters." Another crack of thunder rolled above them. The roof creaked but held. A beat passed, then another. In the quiet between lightning and rain, Ava's voice softened. "When Emily got sick, were there days when you felt like you couldn't breathe?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, fingers still stained from varnish and dust. "Every day," he said finally. "Not because I couldn't handle it, but because I couldn't stop trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix." Ava nodded slowly. "That's how I felt during the worst of it. With the company, with Cole, with the press. I kept trying to hold it all together with my bare hands." He looked at her. "And when they let go, I did too. I think I lost something in the letting go. Not the company, not the title, just the version of me that believed I was enough." Jack's voice was quiet. "You are." Ava met his eyes, and this time she didn't look away. The silence between them pulsed with something neither dared name yet. Not love, not yet, but closeness. Weight. The kind of gravity that draws one soul toward another without demanding anything in return. Outside, a sudden gust shook the walls. Jack bolted upright. "The beam," he muttered. "South corner." They ran outside without speaking. Rain lashed at them sideways as Jack rounded the corner. Flashlight beam cutting through the dark. One of the main support posts had begun to shift, mud pooling at its base, the earth beneath it softening under the relentless storm. "Grab the tension straps," Jack shouted over the wind. Ava moved without hesitation, running to the Jeep to find the steel braces they'd stored for the final build. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, but she got it, brought them back. Jack wrapped the beam while she held it steady, mud soaking her jeans, arms straining. For a moment, the structure groaned above them like it might give, but it didn't. They braced it, together. By the time they returned inside, breathless and soaked to the bone, the worst had passed. The wind quieted. The thunder rolled farther east. Just rain now, softer, slower, the kind that mended more than it broke. Jack sat on the floor, back against the wall, pulling off his wet boots. Ava collapsed beside him, arms limp at her sides. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Jack said quietly, "You didn't run tonight." Ava turned her head toward him. "Neither did you." Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. Later, as the storm gave way to fog, Ava stood barefoot in the empty common room, the smell of rain and wood wrapping around her like a promise. She stared at the beam they'd braced, fingers trailing along the damp wood. Then she picked up a pencil from Jack's toolbox and wrote something small on the edge of the beam, just above eye level. It held. The sun broke through sometime before dawn. Jack woke to its glow on his face, filtering in through the window of the workshop's side room, the makeshift space where he'd been sleeping, just off the main hall. For the first time in days, he heard birdsong instead of hammering rain. He swung his legs over the side of the cot and rubbed the back of his neck. It ached from the night before. Storm winds, mud, tension straps. But the pain was honest, the kind that reminded him he was still alive and still needed. Outside, the property glistened. The soaked gravel shimmered like glass. The beams they'd braced were standing firm. No flooding, no damage. The retreat had weathered the storm, and so had they. He stepped out onto the porch to find Ava already up, her coat unzipped, boots wet from the morning dew. She stood in the clearing near the frame of the west wing, looking upward. A soft smile played on her lips, like someone who'd been forgiven by something older than herself. "You slept?" Jack asked, stepping beside her. "Like a rock," she replied. "After I stopped replaying the storm in my head." He chuckled. "Yeah, that one'll be a memory for a while." She turned to him, her voice softer now. "You never once asked me to stop pushing, even when it got hard." Jack shrugged. "Didn't seem like you needed permission." "I didn't," she said, "but I needed someone who didn't walk away when it got messy." Jack looked down at her, and for a moment said nothing. That afternoon something changed, not in the plans or the schedules, but in the energy that pulsed through the retreat. Word about the storm had traveled, thanks to Frank, who'd casually mentioned it over coffee at the feed store. And by mid-morning, people began arriving. Not reporters, neighbors. One brought fresh-baked bread. Another showed up with extra plywood. A retired electrician from up the road offered to inspect the wiring. A mother whose teenage son had dropped out of school last year asked if he could volunteer. Ava stood on the porch, stunned. "These people weren't here last week," she said. Jack grinned, wiping sawdust from his hands. "They didn't know you needed them." By the end of the day, 15 volunteers were hammering, measuring, sanding, laughing. The sounds filled the valley. More than just construction, it was community, a chorus of hands and hearts building something not just for now, but for tomorrow. Ava moved among them easily, not as a figurehead, not as a CEO, as someone who had finally stopped hiding. In the kitchen space, she showed a young woman how to assemble modular shelving. Outside, she helped two kids dig post holes. At one point, she caught Jack watching her from across the clearing. She smiled and he raised a hand in greeting. Nothing grand, just an acknowledgement. "I see you." That night, they held a small dinner outside under a canvas tarp strung between trees. Nothing fancy. Paper plates, folding tables, soup from a slow cooker. But it felt like a feast. Laughter rose from every corner. The sky had turned a deep indigo, the stars slipping out shyly from behind the parting clouds. Manny stood beside the fire pit, cracking jokes with Cole and two of the new volunteers. Frank played harmonica softly from a rocking chair someone had brought down from a trailer. Ava sat beside Jack at one end of the long table, her eyes shimmering under the lantern light. "I never imagined it would feel like this," she whispered. "Like what?" "Like I'm not building it alone." Jack took a sip of cider and set the mug down. "You were never alone, Ava. You just couldn't see who was waiting to join you." She looked around, the faces glowing in the firelight, the walls now half-framed behind them, the pencil markings from Ava still visible on the beam that held. She turned back to Jack. "You were the first." He didn't deflect, didn't brush it off, just met her gaze and nodded. "Yeah," he said, "but not the last." The wind stirred the trees behind them, gentle now, no longer angry, just present, a reminder of how far they'd come in such a short time, how much still lay ahead. After dessert, someone had brought peach cobbler and enough whipped cream to drown a small town. Jack stood and tapped a spoon against his mug. The conversations quieted, heads turned. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, and laughter followed. "But I want to say this. We didn't build anything alone. Not one board, not one beam. This place stands because people showed up, with hands, with time, with belief." He paused, letting that settle. "And this woman beside me," he said, turning to Ava, "gave us the reason to." She looked down, emotion rising fast in her throat. She hated crying in public, But for once, she didn't fight it. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. The fire crackled. The wind hushed. And something deeper than gratitude passed between them. Something that needed no announcement, no label. Not yet, but it was there. Later that night, as the others drifted away and the sky deepened to navy, Ava and Jack remained by the embers. She leaned against his shoulder, quiet and full. He said, "You did good today." "So did you." He smiled. "You ready for what comes next?" Ava looked at the stars, then back at him. "With you?" "Yeah, I think I am." The day started with sawdust in the air and sunlight warming the cedar boards they'd just finished sealing. Ava stood at the edge of the common room, hands on her hips, surveying the work with a satisfaction so full it surprised her. The west wing, once a skeletal frame, was now enclosed. Windows sparkled with morning dew. The porch was level. The door swung clean on its hinges. It wasn't finished, not yet, but it was standing. And for the first time, it truly felt like a place where people would one day belong. Jack was outside hauling scrap wood into the back of Frank's truck. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms flecked with resin, sun glinting off a silver chain around his neck. Emily's wedding ring, still worn next to his dog tags. A remnant of another life. Ava watched him for a moment from the window. Something in her chest tightened, not from doubt, but from recognition. This man had rebuilt more than a building. He'd helped rebuild her. By early afternoon, the volunteers had cleared out, off to their jobs, their families, their lives. Even Frank packed up early, leaving behind a new batch of homemade jerky and his usual advice: don't let a good day pass without saying something true. The air grew still, and Jack disappeared for an hour. Ava didn't ask where he went. She trusted him the way you trust a good foundation, not because it's loud, but because it holds. He returned just before sunset, stepping into the main room with something small tucked behind his back. His boots tracked in a trail of dust. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those calm, clear eyes, held a flicker of mischief. "Can I borrow you for a minute?" he asked. Ava raised a brow. "Borrow? Promise to return you better than I found you." She smiled. "That's a bold promise, Dalton." He led her outside. The sky was lit in soft amber, the kind of gold that didn't last more than 10 minutes, the kind you didn't want to miss. The retreat stood glowing in it. New wood, glass reflections, the beam where she had once written, it held now catching the last light. They stopped under the tree where they'd first sat the night after the storm. Jack turned to her, cleared his throat, then pulled the object from behind his back. It was a small wooden box, rough handmade, about the size of a sandwich. On the lid was a tiny brass airplane propeller, clearly repurposed from some old model. He opened the box. Inside, nestled in a bed of worn flannel, was a ring. Not gold, not silver, but a simple circle of dark steel, bent and soldered with intention. A single smooth bolt was affixed where a gem might go, polished until it gleamed. Ava stared. Jack's voice was soft. "I don't have diamonds. I don't have a speech. I didn't plan this the way other men might." She looked up at him, heart thudding. "I've spent the last 10 years fixing things," he continued, "trying to make sense of loss, trying to stay useful. But you," he paused, searching for the words, "you didn't need fixing. You just needed someone to believe that what you're building matters. And I needed to believe that starting again didn't mean forgetting." Ava blinked, lips parted. "I know you're not ready to slow down. I know you're not done dreaming, but if there's a place in that blueprint of yours for someone who knows how to carry weight without dropping it, I'd like to build it with you." Silence. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because every part of her was saying yes before her voice caught up. She stepped forward, eyes misting, and took the ring from the box. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said. Jack grinned, sheepish. "It's just a steel washer and a bolt. It's a story. It's us." She held out her left hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. Not perfectly, but well enough, like it was made with intuition rather than measurement. And sometimes that was better. They stood in the golden quiet for a long while, foreheads touching, her hands in his. Then Jack whispered, "So is that a yes?" Ava laughed through her tears. "It's a hell yes." Later that night, The retreat glowed from within, lanterns casting warm halos across the porch and wooden walls. The corkboard inside now held a new photo. Ava and Jack under the tree, her hand on his chest, the steel ring catching the last of the sun. Under it, Frank had scribbled, "Built from scratch, stronger than steel." It was opening day. No ribbons, no speeches, no big city photographers, just the warm hum of voices, laughter in the air, and the soft creak of floorboards in a place that had finally come alive. Ava stood near the front door of the newly finished common room, her boots planted firmly on smooth pine, sunlight falling in from the high windows like blessings. The tables were full, young people in flannel and baseball caps leaning over circuit boards, old veterans trading stories with tech mentors, and a group of local girls building their first drone with bare calloused hands. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Outside, the smell of cedar and campfire lingered. The forest beyond the clearing stood still, like it was listening. Ava ran her hand along the beam beside the door, the one Jack had reinforced the night of the storm. It held, she'd written, and it still did. Behind her, Jack stepped in quietly, a clipboard in one hand, a thermos of strong coffee in the other. He wore a clean shirt today, still flannel, but new. His beard had been trimmed. His eyes, however, still held the same soft light, part wisdom, part wonder. "They're all here," he said, stepping beside her. She smiled. "I wasn't sure they'd come." "They didn't come for a show," he replied. "They came for the promise." "And what's the promise?" she asked. Jack looked around at the crowd, then back at her. "That the world still has room for second chances, and that this," he gestured to the retreat, to the buzzing of tools, to the stories being written in solder and wood. "This is proof." Ava nodded, her throat tight. A group of kids raced past them, laughing. One paused to wave at Ava. Another asked Jack if he could teach them how to build a quadcopter that could carry a GoPro. He promised to show them after lunch. The future had already started moving. Later that afternoon, under a sky washed clean by last week's storm, they gathered outside for a small dedication. Frank said a few words, mostly about wood and the importance of starting with a level foundation, and then handed Ava a hand-carved sign. It read, "The Kingsley Dalton Workshop for Innovation and Repair, where dreams are made to fly again." Ava ran her fingers over the letters, the rough grain beneath her skin grounding her more deeply than any corporate title ever had. She looked at Jack. "Kingsley Dalton," she murmured. He winked. "Alphabetical order. Thought it sounded more official that way." She laughed and squeezed his hand. The crowd clapped, not for fame or money, but for effort, for hope, for something honest carved out of what once seemed broken. That evening, after the crowd had thinned and twilight began painting the trees in lavender and blue, Ava and Jack sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They watched as the lights inside flickered on one by one, soft yellow glows like lanterns on a trail. "I used to think love came at the end," Ava said softly. Jack turned to her, curious. "At the end of success, at the end of some big journey, like a reward. And now?" She tilted her head back to look at him. "Now I think it's what makes you start, what gives everything meaning." He nodded. "Like the first spark before the engine turns." "Exactly." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars appear. Then Ava said, "You ever think about flying again?" Jack looked out across the darkening field. "I do. Sometimes I miss it." Ava grinned. "Good, because I've been talking with one of the kids. Riley. He wants to get his pilot's license." Jack raised a brow. "He does? And I might have told him we'd teach him together." Jack laughed, low and warm. "You roped me into flight school, huh?" "You love it," she teased. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Yeah," he said. "I really do." Weeks passed, then months. The retreat grew, not in size but in soul. More kids came. More stories unfolded. Some stayed for a summer, some just a weekend. But every single one left a piece of themselves behind. On the corkboard, in the journals, in the walls. Ava began recording a podcast, Beneath the Wings, where she shared stories from the retreat. No sponsors, no ads, just voices, real ones. Jack's voice featured in episode 3, talking about torque and heartbreak like they were siblings. One morning in early spring, Ava stood outside the workshop, a breeze playing with her hair. A student named Talia had just finished her first solo build, a carbon fiber glider, and it had actually flown. For real. Talia turned to her, beaming. You think I could really do this? Make things that fly? Ava crouched to her level and said without hesitation, You already are. Talia hugged her tight, then ran off to tell Jack. And Ava stood there watching, hands in her jacket pockets, a steel ring warm against her finger. She whispered almost to herself, This was always the sky I was meant to fly in. A photo of the first full class of students, arms raised, smiles wide. Beneath it, written in Jack's careful print, We didn't just fix a jet, we built a runway for hearts. If you made it to the end of this story, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country, city, or hometown in the comments. It's always amazing to see how stories connect people from all over the world. And if this story touched your heart, let me know your favorite moment or what message stayed with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you never miss another inspiring story. Every week, we bring you tales of love, resilience, and the quiet power of kindness. Thank you for spending your time here. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, take care, be kind, and keep believing in second chances.